The police are able to use it to paint the Negro community as a criminal element. The police are able to use the press to make the white public think that 90% or 99% of the Negroes in the Negro community are criminals. And once the white public is convinced that most of the Negro community is a criminal element, then this automatically paves the way for the police to move into the Negro community, exercising Gestapo tactics, stopping any black man who is on the sidewalk, whether he is guilty or whether he is innocent, whether he is well dressed or whether he is poorly dressed, whether he is educated or whether he is dumb, whether he's a Christian or whether he's a Muslim. As long as he is black and a member of the Negro community, the white public thinks that the white policeman is justified in going in there and trampling on that man's civil rights and on that man's human rights. Once the police have convinced the white public that the so-called Negro community is a criminal element, they can go in and question, brutalize, murder unarmed, innocent Negroes, and the white public is gullible enough to back them up. This makes the Negro community a police state. This makes the Negro neighborhood a police state. It's the most heavily patrolled. It has more police in it than any other neighborhood, yet it has more crime in it than any other neighborhood. How can you have more cops and more crime? Why? It shows you that the cops must be in cahoots with the criminals.
Slavery is a system of forced labor that has existed throughout the world for thousands of years. In America, slavery began in the 17th century when people in Africa were overpowered and forced to leave their native land, their culture, and their families behind.
Europeans and others did not simply march into Africa and just take people off. I mean, there were battles, there were wars that were lost, by the British, by the French, by the Portuguese, as well as those which were won. You had males and females leading forces against the enslavers.
Europeans responded by coercing one tribe to enslave another, threatening to arm their enemies with terrifying new weapons if they did not cooperate. These tribal slave traders selected strong, healthy males and females between the ages of 18 and 35, although children were often captured as well. The African captives were chained together at the ankle or wrist, or linked at the neck by a wooden yoke. Once bound, the captives embarked on a grueling march, sometimes as long as 600 miles to the coast, where European ships awaited them. Many perished from the rigors of the trip. Others resisted their captors and were killed. The Atlantic crossing took from 4 to 8 weeks. Men, women, and children were crowded into tightly packed quarters. The ordeal was so demoralizing that the Africans often sank into a deep depression. Some chose death rather than to endure the degradation.
they attempted to escape on ships by simply, if the opportunity offered itself, by leaping off and drowning or whatever. Once they were bound by the continental United States, the protests took the form more of insurrection.
The first slaves in the American colonies, a cargo of about 20 Africans, arrived at Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. The number of enslaved Africans increased steadily each year. By 1763, the colonial population included an estimated 230,000 Africans, most of them slaves in the South.
A slave was someone who could be forced to work from the age of 8, 6, 4 even, long hours at tasks that someone else decided. A slave was a person who had no right to a vacation. A slave was a person who had no rights to wages. A slave could have no property. A slave could not marry.
By the late 18th century, the textile industry had entered a period of rapid development in both England and in the northern United States. This growth created a tremendous demand for Southern cotton. In 1793, Eli Whitney developed the cotton gin, a machine that cleaned cotton 5 times faster than manual methods. As a result, more slaves were needed to pick and haul the cotton. By 1860, there would be 4 million African slaves in the United States. This enormous population of slaves was owned by a small group of the wealthiest and most powerful whites in American society. As African slaves toiled in the fields, laws were created to enforce their low status. They were prohibited from participating in lawsuits, from owning property or firearms, and from possessing alcohol. Most states did not recognize slave marriages and often prohibited slaves from learning to read and write. The treatment slaves received from their masters varied tremendously. Some owners were brutal sadists who worked their slaves mercilessly and threatened them with corporal discipline so painful that it amounted to torture.
And if you were ordered to do a task that you knew would be dangerous to you, you had to do it. So even though it's tempting to put poverty and slavery together, they were very different. And the difference is that enslaved workers had no rights.
A slave had no protection from this mistreatment because the law considered a slave another man's property, not a human being. When a slave suffered a whipping, he could neither fight back nor take his master to court. Slaves developed an independent culture unknown to their masters. They spun fantastic spoken narratives that passed from one generation to the next. These folk tales expressed the enslaved Africans' aspirations for a better life. Many slaves found strength to endure oppression through their religion, which blended Christianity with African beliefs.
Spirituality was a strong force in the life of the slave. Slaves could turn to God with all of their problems. Slaves could ask God to either relieve them of the burden of a brutal slave master or to free them from the day-to-day struggle in their lives.
At the core of slave society was the family. Slave families suffered when one member was sold to another plantation. Owners usually kept women and children together, selling off the father and sons. On the well-established plantations, black families had a better chance of remaining intact, some enduring for 3 or 4 generations. Although religion, folk tales, and family life softened the horrors of slavery, they did not lessen the humiliating aspects of servitude. Slaves sought more direct means of resisting their bondage, through violent rebellion or subtle and covert acts of resistance.
You found people who were enslaved that resisted by working very slowly, pretending that they didn't know how to do something, accidentally breaking equipment, just slowing down the process, not happy-go-lucky going along with everything. These were all forms of resistance.
Wherever there were Africans in the Western Hemisphere, there were slave revolts. Haiti's Toussaint Louverture helped rid the island of European domination by organizing his people into a standing army of several thousand troops. The best-known slave revolt in U.S. history occurred in 1831 in Southampton, Virginia. It was led by a plantation headman named Nat Turner, who rose up in revolt with other slaves.
I want a song to sing till the heaven and joy bells ring as I travel.
It's Sunday, September the 15th, 1963, and 12-year-old schoolgirl Sarah Collins is on her way to the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, with her older sister Addie Mae, who's 14.
But one thing about her, she was very timid, and you can hurt her feelings. She was a peacemaker in the family.
The church is a meeting point for civil rights campaigners as they focus on Birmingham. Martin Luther King sometimes preaches here, but for girls like Sarah and Addie Mae, from a very poor family of 8 children, going to Sunday school is embarrassing.
We didn't want to go that particular Sunday because of our teacher was really, on the mean side, and she would embarrass us. When we didn't have the money to put in church like the other girls, she would always say she believed that we spent it across the street where they had a candy store. But it was just the fact that we didn't spend it, but that particular Sunday we didn't have any money, period.
Perhaps playing for time, Sarah and Addie Mae head for the washroom, where they're joined by Cynthia Wesley and Carol Robertson and 11-year-old Denise McNair.
First it was just Addie. She was standing across from me at the couch. And that's when Cynthia, Denise, and Carol came in the door, and they went on the other side, where the stalls were. And when they came out, Denise turned around and asked Addie to tie the sash on her dress. And as we stood there and looked and waited for her to reach her hands out to tie it, that's when the bomb went off. Boom! It was the loudest sound I ever heard, noise. Ooh. And it scared me so bad, I just called out, Jesus! And I said, Addie, Addie, Addie.
A box filled with dynamite had been planted behind the church by white supremacists. The other 4 girls in the washroom were killed, but remarkably, Sarah was left standing, but badly injured.
I felt a stinging all over my body, like glass just came in. By me standing over at the sink, glass came and hit my body, and it was a hurting, sting feeling.
And one piece of glass went in your eye?
It was several pieces went in my eye.
Sarah was taken to hospital by ambulance, unaware that the others were dead. Her eldest sister, Junie, was one of her first visitors.
And when I asked her that, where was Addie? And she said Addie had hurt her back, and she'll be there to see me tomorrow, like that. So I believed her, but I overheard her tell somebody that one of her sisters was killed in the bombing. And I didn't say anything about it, but I kept on wondering, why did they kill Addie? Why did they kill her? And then later on, I found out that all the girls was dead that was in there.
When you found out
that all the girls had been killed, what went through your mind?
Why would somebody put a bomb on our church and kill those girls? They're sweet girls. All of them was angels.
It has now become our happy privilege to commit the body of Addie Mae Collins to the Mother Earth and her spirit to God, who giveth.
Birmingham, Alabama was a mining town. People knew how to handle explosives. During the fight for civil rights, black homes and businesses were attacked so often the city was dubbed Bombingham. Coming just 2 weeks after the March on Washington and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, the murder of the 4 girls was an outrage that reverberated around the world.
To the president's chagrin, demonstrations continued. In 1965, protests targeted Selma, Alabama, the seat of Dallas County, where fewer than 1% of eligible blacks were registered to vote. And where bully boy segregationist Sheriff Jim Clark and his deputized citizens posse rounded up civil rights activists using Gestapo tactics and cattle prods. SNCC's John Lewis was among more than 2,000 demonstrators jailed in the first months of 1965. The Reverend C.T. Vivian, an organizer for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, led the Selma campaign.
We're willing to be beaten for democracy, and you misuse democracy in the street. You beat people bloody in order that they will not have the privilege to vote. You beat me in the side and then hide your blows. Well, go on. No, I don't need to leave. We have come to register to vote. And you must realize that this is a national issue. It's not a Selma issue. It's not an Alabama issue. This is a national issue. Whenever anyone does not have the right to vote, then every man is hurt. I don't need to leave. We have come to
On the night of February 18th, state troopers savagely attacked Vivian and other demonstrators. In the chaos, a young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot at point-blank range in what the local newspaper called a nightmare of state police stupidity.
He was murdered by the irresponsibility of every politician from governors on down who has fed his constituents the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism.
The tragedy galvanized the Selma voting rights campaign. SCLC's James Bevel proposed a symbolic march from Selma to the Alabama state capitol in Montgomery, more than 50 miles away. On March 7, 1965, SNCC's John Lewis and the SCLC's Hosea Williams led a procession of more than 500 marchers over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Alabama state troopers, clad in gas masks and riot gear, waited on the other side.
It'll be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly. You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church. This march will not continue.
News cameras immortalized a hellish scene of police brutality and chaos. Images of Bloody Sunday shocked the nation. Time magazine reported that rarely in human history has public opinion reacted so spontaneously and with such fury.
Melanin is a neurochemical that is produced in part through the pituitary and the pineal gland. They both play a central role in the production of melanin, which is ultimately responsible for the color that we have in our skin. Now, historically, it had always been thought that melanin played a significant role in the intellectual propensity of African people. For example, when you study some of the Greek writings on melanin or the color of Africans, many of the Greek philosophers believed that melanin played some sort of a role in how Africans had been able to create and develop some of the sciences that they had come to be known for. So melanin was always considered an intellectual sort of a chemical.
The pineal gland, which produces melanin, it's shaped like a pine cone. And the origin of the word pineal literally means resembling a pine cone. Now, in ancient symbolisms, the pine cone has always been represented because people knew the importance of the pineal gland as it related to melanin and the universe.
Melanin is a molecule, and the concept of melanin is, it is black in its nature, and we find it in the cosmos, we find it in the heavens, we find it in water, we find it in land, we find it in everything that exists.
The sperm of the male and the egg of the woman, they're both layered with melanin, so that when the sperm penetrates the egg, there is a melanin explosion. And that melanin helps to formulate the fetus within that egg. And that fetus is literally coated with the melanin substance. And that melanin substance then goes on to form the brain and the central nervous system. So every human being begins with a melanin explosion.
Melanin is an intelligence. It's an intelligence because it is the dynamic, the primary dynamic in every part of the cell. It's a primary dynamic in the core of the human being as well as to the surface of the human being. Its intelligence is responsible for the forming of the nervous system. Every part of the nervous system has these little black dots all through it, which essentially carry information.
So melanin, from a physical standpoint, is that substance that accounts for what black people refer to as soul. We move differently, we walk differently, we talk differently because we have access to a different form of energy than other folk.
Not only is melanin a pigment, which is so obvious, but melanin as an intelligence is a communications module that essentially broadcasts as well as receives information by way of light and sound frequency signatures.
So me, and I'm pretty sure most of you guys, grew up thinking or hearing that being black is bad, being too black is bad, being light-skinned or being white is more, you know what I'm saying, powerful or more attractive, because that's obviously what we see on our commercials, on our TV, everywhere we go, on posters, you know what I'm saying? We see these Caucasian images, we see these more lighter images being more successful in life, and most likely in comedy, people talk down on, oh, you're black, blah, blah, ASS, you know what I'm saying? That's straight buffoonery, that's foolishness. And if you have knowledge of self, scientifically, you will know that the more melanin in a human body is the better, the more in tune you are with nature. Our sun is the primary life giver on this planet. And our melanin, through a process called ultra-fast eternal conversion, it allows our skin, our melanin, to absorb that sunlight, those harmful UV rays that can be harmful for some people, and turn it into harmless heat in the human body. You know what I'm saying? So that's basically, melanin gives us the ability to live our everyday life with the sun or with nature, because sun is the part of nature and it's a primary life giver to this planet. Our sun gives us so much nutrients, and our melanin allows us to adapt with this powerful force, the sun, and adapt us to live in peaceful mutuality with the sun and with nature. So that's one thing that melanin can do for you. And I took a couple notes here stating the difference between the black, more melanated man and the Caucasian man, which has less melanin. It is said that all humans possess melanin, but not to the degree that African people all over the world do. Black people have around 360 centers, melanin centers, in their stomach region, as opposed to Caucasians, which only have 40. The African black human, which has primarily 12 melanin centers in their brain, while the non-African brain only have 2 melanin centers. The key to effectiveness of melanin is the fact that it is primarily carbon-based and is the most effective in handling heat and ray of the sun, primary life giver of the planet, which I talked about earlier. The ancestors of not only the world but primarily black people had highly developed body parts and organs, especially a part of the human body called the pineal gland. This is where it gets important, because the pineal gland is where our melanin processes. This part of the body, along with the pituitary gland, allows individuals to sense things and visualize things in their environment that cannot be sensed through the ordinary 5 senses, and which do not work nearly as much as it did in the past because of a dumbed down society. I mean, things like fluoride in our water, the poisons in our food, our organs of our human body, it can't work as strong as it usually does. And they know that. That's why they poison us. That's why they spray us with chemtrails. So we can't, you know what I'm saying, be as strong as we can. So even physically, not even spiritually, physically, we're not as strong as we can because of all the poisons that we take in our body. So it's important for you to stay healthy and pick your poisons. Another note I took, melanin means black amino and is a color pigment composed of hydrocarbon chain which has various amino, nitrogen-based compounds attached to it. It is carbon that gives melanin its blackness. Carbon is the organizing molecule that gives melanin its structure. It is carbon that gives melanin the ability to absorb energy and bend with other molecules while retaining stability. So basically these notes that I took is basically pointing key things of how important it is to have melanin.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neil?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
that you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, glory, glory, glory. Oh, glory, glory.
Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon formed against, yes, glory is destined. Everyday women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all just ain't specific enough. One son died, his spirit is revisiting us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up. When it go down, we woman and man up. They say stay down, and we stand up. Shots we on the ground, the camera panned up. King pointed to the mountaintop, and we ran up.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, glory, glory, glory. Oh, glory, glory. Now the war is not over, victory isn't won, but we'll fight on to the finish, and then when it's all done, we'll cry glory, oh glory,
Selma is now for every man, woman, and child. Even Jesus got his crown in front of a crowd. They march with the torch, we gon' run with it now. Never look back, we done gone hundreds of miles. From dark roads, heroes, to become a hero. Facing the League of Justice, his power was the people. Enemy is lethal, a king became regal. Saw the face of Jim Crow under a bald ego. No one can win a war individually. It take the wisdom of the elders and young people's energy. Welcome to the story we call victory. The coming of the Lord, my eyes have seen the glory.
One day, when the glory comes,